Um, Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you back to the conversation on behalf of the Feast Center for Indigenous STBBI Research to the recording of Conversation Series Part 2 on gender. I would like to acknowledge that I am calling in today from the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement territory, and of course, to the power of our online connection and the reach of this conversation series, we are sea to sea to sea here on Turtle Island. In the context of the conversation series at the Feast Center, we really value your participation and supports for events such as this. And we welcome you to follow us on Instagram and social media. We do also have a host of resources that are open to the public, and you can find us at www.feastcenter.mcmaster.ca. Inchi Catherine Booker, Nino Ngiai Lanahi. I'm a mixed cis femme with Munsee, Black, and settler ancestry, and my pronouns are she, her. And I have the privilege to be your research coordinator, Auntie, at the Feast Center. I am returning as your facilitator for the continuation of this conversation exploring gender. And I am looking forward to listening to the stories and experiences of our speakers with us here today. And Anoushik for joining me as our audience in this webinar format. We are hosting today's conversation in a webinar format for the safe engagement of our speakers and our audience in this digital space. So as you listen, if you have any questions, you'll be able to put them in the question and answer box, not the chat, for our wonderful moderator and National Director, Will Gooding, to forward if we have time at the end of the conversation or in the continuation of this conversation at a later date. I do invite you to listen to the first part of this conversation where we discuss health, wellness, and care for Indigenous peoples and where that intersects with concepts of gender. Joining us again today is our wonderful speakers, Elder Sheila Nyman, Elder Albert McLeod, and Doris Peltier. As I pause this recording, I would like to ask Elder Albert to open our conversation at this time. And I don't know if I could pause it, but I can certainly.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay if it's recording. So thank you, Catherine and William and Doris and Sheila, who joined us today, as well as the people who signed on. This is the second in the series around discussions about gender and research, particularly Indigenous ideas about gender. So as we're told by our knowledge keepers, our ceremonial people and our elders, that before we do this work, which again is very important, not just to Indigenous people, but to all peoples, that we call in spirit to guide us in our work, and that we wash away those things that might distract us from our conversations today so that we get the best of what people have to share. So, tobacco is offered to the speakers and indirectly offered to the spiritual world as an offering to those spirits to be present, to see us, to hear us, to guide us if they can. And so here in the prairies, we have the sacred pipe, which during the ceremony is pointed in 7 directions. Begins with the 4 cardinal directions, the east, the south, the west, and the north. Then the earth below, the sky above, and finally it circles to the people gathered in a circle, just as we are today. And it's offered to us. So the tobacco eventually comes to us to come into the circle, to share our knowledge, our courage, our strength, our faith, our ingenuity that might come to us as we think about what we're talking about today. And so those spirits are present through this invocation. And we use, the smudge ceremony, which is the burning of the sacred medicines, and the belief that that smoke will travel into that dimension and awaken those spirits that are meant to be with us. Or if a song is sung, or a drum is sounded, or if a shaker is sounded, those are all instruments that are meant to travel and awaken those spirits. We don't know what spirits will be present. We may never know, and we don't need to know. Again, this practice is about faith and belief. And so that's how we move forward, because as humans, we have a very short time on this earth. And again, we want to improve the future, wellness for the generations that are coming, so they don't carry the burden of colonization. They don't carry the burden of discrimination or anti-Indigenous racism. And they don't carry the burden of diseases or infectious diseases as we move forward. So those are very powerful, intentions that we have. And so again, that is why we call it spirits to participate and join us today. Rich.
Thank you, Albert. And I would like to invite our speakers to introduce themselves today. Albert, would you like to start?
Yes, I'm from northern Manitoba, a little village called Cormorant, which was a Métis village back in the day, 50s and 60s, where I grew up. So my early childhood was very much one on the land, and my worldview evolved with the beauty of nature, the beauty of plants and animals, and the lake where we lived. And I'm very grateful for that. And I revisit that every year, the North, which is very much my foundation of my identity and my spirituality, as well as my psyche. And my ancestors were Scottish, who were part of the Hudson Bay Fur Trade, as well as the Woodland Cree, who were also part of the fur trade, for the last 150 years. So I carry that sort of colonial mindset, a merging of cultures, particularly Britain, and with the Indigenous Cree culture of the North. I live in Winnipeg for the last 40 years and worked and studied very closely with the Ojibwe people here about their language, their worldview, their ceremonies, their spirituality, as well as their psychology of life, which I think is what we're talking about today, Rich.
Sheila, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Why? Welcome, everyone. Happy to be here in this circle. To me, it's a circle, even though we're not all sitting in chairs or on the floor in a circle or on the ground, but I see a circle. I feel a circle. I am Sylph Métis from the Lower Similkameen in the Okanagan Valley of British Columbia. My maternal family's territory crosses that invisible line that was put there. So the territory extends into what is known today as the US. It's a very big territory. I was lucky to be able to be in and around my family until I was 9, and then was taken during the 60s scoop. And with my 5 other siblings, I made my way back to my home, to my territory. And from there, I began to learn the ways of my ancestors and my family. I am a survivor of the 60s scoop. I'm not sure about the word survivor. However, it's my experience, my life experience, and a lot of my life is based on that. But I had the beauty of being around my great-grandmother and my family before. My paternal family are from Sweden. They came here, went into, actually it was still on my territory, my mom's territory of my maternal ancestors, in the mountains of the Mashi, where mining was taking place. I don't know my paternal family because, well, my mom didn't stay for her own life. She took us kids and left with us, which left her vulnerable. I have received teachings by an elder, many buffalo running, since the early 90s. I've been put on the mountain times on 6 spirit quests, or fasts people call them, or vision quests is another way people say. And I've been taught traditional ceremonies. I've been given permission after being watched and put through many initiations. I've been given permission to share ceremony, share teachings, I also carry a master's degree in social work, which I secured after I was over 50, because I was already working with people and had a counseling certificate. I actually went to university, got a master's. My master's thesis was based on energy. It was based on tradition, healing, and ceremony to support the healing of traumatic experiences. That thesis came to me while I was in the big house on the island. So I, for myself, believe I have a very knowledge base, and the knowledge comes to me from many directions. And I also seek knowledge. I continue to seek knowledge. I continue more about my experiences and about life, such as being a spirit, which is how I identify today. I use the pronoun she and they. And I'm looking forward to this conversation because it's not always that we get to sit and talk about these things or bring them out. And indeed, we're in a time of transition, and I'm so glad that two-spirit people are in the forefront of it. All my relations.
Doris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Okay, miigwech. Ani bojo. Koendag zit nishnikas. Owash do dem. Nishna bendao. Wikwem kongdon jiba. So I just let the ancestors know it's me. Koendag zit. Which means if you were thinking in a Western kind of mindset, my Anishinaabe name would mean giving voice. But if you're thinking in Anishinaabe Nendamoin, in Anishinaabe intellectual way of thinking, it's got a much deeper meaning. It identifies the person that speaks to those things that others are not willing or not wanting to speak about. So that's what my name means. Truth teller, I guess, in a way. I come from Wikwemkong in the Great Lakes region, Manitoulin Island, and which at one time had the designation of being the world's largest freshwater island. But now with the effects of climate on our water, I don't know if we still have that distinction. My community is, I say I'm Anishinaabe, which means human being. And but my nation is Odawa. And I'm connected to the Three Fires Confederacy, which is Odawa, Ojibwe, and Bodwe Adami. Those are the three nations under the Three Fires Confederacy. And our territory stretched in, there was no border. It's in southern Ontario, southern Manitoba, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Kansas. So that's how big of a territory our nations come from. And I was raised in my home community as a Anishinaabe, and I grew up with my language, hearing my language every day. And I was also sent to elders all the time as a young child. Every winter, I was sent to go stay with an elder, usually an elder that a woman elder. I was sent to in every winter to stay with her and help her during the winter. And these were women that had been widowed or were living alone. So we were sent to stay with them in the wintertime. So I grew up in the wintertime hearing stories from these elders. And I also grew up with within my own home hearing stories. And the storytelling that I heard was all in Anishinaabe. And so I had the opportunity to listen to many of these stories, and there was a lot of humor all the time and lots of laughter. And what I really like about the storytelling was that um, the elders would really emulate some of the characters that they were talking about. So an elder might get up and make gestures and make facial do stuff with their face to elevate the story, to really pull you into the story. And all of this was in Anishinaabe. And so I grew up with the language, despite the fact that my community had 2 industrial schools that were established there in the mid 1800s. And I did a bit of research on why those industrial schools were established in my community. And in my research, which I'm not going to go into, um, the industrial schools were a precursor to residential schools. So that was the initial plan, that they were going to use these industrial schools to teach agricultural skills and those kinds of skills to indigenous people. But then they were too costly. So they found it was cheaper to have residential schools. And so that's a bit of the history. And I share that because we had these industrial schools in my community. And some of the other history that I found out about my community was it started as a Catholic mission. As early as the mid 1600s, the Jesuits set up a mission in what is now my community. And so they set up this mission. And then in the 1700s, they fled for whatever reason. But then they came back in the early 1800s and reestablished that mission. And so the impact of those industrial schools had an impact in my community. And it's still something that is unspoken and hasn't been unpacked. And I hope at some point that we begin to look at those impacts of having actual industrial schools in our community, and which came with the Jesuit missionary and the Catholic Church, and all the impacts of that, the Catholicism on our community, which is still there. But the traditional people went underground, but we still maintained our stories. And so I hope at some point my community unpacks that historical piece in our community, because from my perspective, it had a real impact on all our lives. But it didn't take our language, though, for those of us that remained in our community. And I'm happy about that, because today I still speak my language, despite the fact that I've been living away from my community. I'm a city dweller. And so that's as much as I'm going to share about myself, Miigwech. And thank you, everybody who's joined us. Miigwech.
Thank you, Doris. So we are continuing our conversation on gender, and this is an ongoing conversation, and it needs to be ongoing, in that we are exploring teachings and tensions in the discourse around Indigenous concepts of gender and identity. In our previous conversation, we discussed language, teachings, and knowledges, and some of the tensions in our understandings in relation to gender. as well as engaging with a gendered identity as Indigenous people. There were lots of insightful questions from the audience. So I wanted to start our conversation by asking our speakers, what has stayed with you?
In terms of,
From our previous conversation.
oh, yeah, I think there was a lot presented last week. And for myself, it really is, centering that we are in a period of decolonization and reconciliation. And these are huge Canadian initiatives about trying to balance Canadian history with that of colonization. So there have been huge, consultations across Canada with Canadians and with Indigenous people that go back to 1991, which is the Aboriginal Justice Inquiry for Manitoba, and then the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, and then the Truth and Reconciliation Commission with its 94 calls for action. And then recently in 2019, the inquiry into murder of missing Indigenous women and girls in Canada with its 231 calls for justice. So I think it's against that context that we have these dialogues about gender, what it means to Indigenous peoples, whether it is First Nations, Inuit or Métis peoples, around structuring society, structuring governance, structuring healing, structuring education, as well as safe spaces for everybody. I know out of the National Inquiry, the Canadian Mortgage and Housing has dedicated $700 million for shelters and transition spaces for Indigenous women and Two-Spirit people. So that's the environment that we're in now, is we're really in building community, building spaces that are inclusive. Okay.
Doris, what stayed with you from our last conversation?
What stayed with me was something that's very near and dear to my heart as well, and dear to my heart in terms of my understanding. And as a Anishinaabe person, I'm on this trajectory of recognizing that all of what we know and those teachings that we carry from the ancestors are embodied in us. And I know that Sheila acknowledged, and quite often I'll hear her acknowledge the blood memory that that we have. And Albert mentioned about his childhood and growing up, and his mother and his family recognizing who he was from a very young age. And I call that embodied Indigenous knowledge. And many of us carry that embodied Indigenous knowledge, whether we know it or not. We just have to brush away the debris of colonization to uncover that that embodied Indigenous knowledge. And quite often, and that's what really stands out for me when I have this beautiful opportunity to sit with two elders. I don't consider myself an elder. I consider myself a knowledge holder, because I have the language and the world that comes within the language, which is something that I'm really taking a deep dive into to shift my understanding, to decolonize my own mind, And because even in our languages have been colonized as well. And the reason why our languages are colonized is because we learned another language that took away, that began to dilute that knowledge that we have, or bury it somewhere, you know, where we kind of forgot about it. And we think in English terms, even within our own languages. So we have to also decolonize our languages, because there's a Western mindset that's kind of encroached itself into the way we speak our languages. And you might not even recognize that sometimes, and that your language has been colonized. But you have to think about it and begin to hear. If you're speaking your language, you listen to what you're saying and try and reach for the true meaning of what you're saying, instead of translating it into Western terms, using the Western syntax, which is a sentence structure. So I picked up a lot from my co-presenters in terms of that embodied knowledge, and that is emerging in all the work that we're doing, each of us in our own way. And so I hope to add my voice at times into the discourse, and into the storytelling, or into the conversations that's more nuanced around my Anishinaabe understanding, because we're talking about Indigenous excellence when we think about our ways, and the way we formulate these worldviews from our ways of knowing and being. And so that was the biggest thing. I always try and pick up on that when I'm on a panel. I always try and pick up on the embodied knowledge, the embodied Indigenous knowledge that emerges in every conversation that we have. And I really want to encourage more of that, and people to recognize that in themselves. And so I'm looking forward to this conversation today. Miigwech.
Thank you so much, Doris. And Sheila, you spoke yesterday about the embodied knowledges of life givers and the roles and responsibilities that were part of that. And I really, really appreciated that and learning that from you. What has stayed with you? Pardon me. What has stayed with you from our last conversation?
Well, I would have to say just the whole conversation, in that it had me, wanting to look deeper into this. Definitely spent time thinking about, talking about with some of my Indigenous relatives, not blood relatives, but relatives in spirit, about the polarity of male female. And like, just really, really, even this morning, I found myself, I woke up probably about 6 British Columbia time, and I was sourcing something, because I woke up with a question. I have a question about it. So yeah, the whole conversation, because it creates movement, it created an energy, and everything we do is energy. And when we talk about something, the energy moves. And when it's moving, then that's when you get to work with it. You get to expand it. You get to look at it. So we now have created the movement of the energy of the question of gender and sex. So that's what stuck with me on my relations.
Thank you so much, Sheila. So I'm picking up today's conversation. We're starting with an area of care and where it intersects with a gendered and significant community role in many, many Indigenous communities, the role of auntie. Our aunties hold a central family, cultural, and social positioning that upholds community well-being and carries forward traditions. The title of auntie is more often a term of endearment for an elder or older mentor. They can be your literal aunt, or they could also be a close family friend or a respected figure in your community. We know that the diversity of our aunties is informed by how this role is understood within and across First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities and families, and that these roles imply certain relationships and responsibilities. We just know an auntie when we see one. So my first question for our speakers today is, how do you know your aunties, or how do you embody the role of auntie in your community?
Yeah, I think aunties are very nosy. They're always in other people's business.
They are.
And but there's a intention behind that, because they are, you know, in many ways our kinship extends to who's with us for that day, that week. You know, many people move away from their birth families, their home communities, and are put into new, you know, family dynamics or situations where there isn't sort of that immediate kin. So other people step in to take on those roles. That's a natural, you know, outcome of socialization. And it exists around the world, you know, for many Indigenous cultures. So, you know, Roger Roulette said, you know, the main imperatives of the Indigenous or Ojibwe worldview was pragmatism, common sense, and reason. So if you're in that anti-age and you can be a help to other people, like elders, like youth, you know, who may not have their immediate family around them, you function as an auntie, and you treat them like your kin, your relative, and you provide what they need. And for myself, I was a mother to many Two-Spirit people. I'm a kukum now to many Two-Spirit people. And now I'm an auntie to Two-Spirit people who are in that age group, let's see, 30 to 40, because I'm 68 now, right? So for that age group, I'm not their grandmother, I'm not their mother, but I fit into that auntie age for them anyway, when they are 30 and 40 years old. So they're more recently calling me auntie. And what I do is use my experience in getting to be Two-Spirit and 68 in this country. And it is really about, you know, confronting all the bullshit, all that historical, you know, legacy of burdens of residential school or anti-Indigenous racism, and just, you know, helping them to move forward with their essential skills. And, you know, like Doris and Sheila have mentioned, we have it in our blood. You know, we have that intention, that pathway. And much of it is guided by our traditions, our language, our ceremonies. You know, I was at Healing Our Spirit Worldwide, which is an international conference of Indigenous peoples in Vancouver, I think last month. It was their 9th gathering, and they had a Two-Spirit show, which included drag. So here, internationally, with regard to gender identity, this is the shift, this is the change, right? We're making space. What does it mean when you have a biological male transformed into a woman and performing a ritual song about love and hope and pain, right? So we've come a long way. And these are the things, you know, that show decolonization and reconciliation and healing when we respect that deity of the merged gender of male and female. And we support it and we celebrate it. So to me, you know, it's a long road, but it's happening, and I'm really proud that it happened in Vancouver, in Canada. Yeah.
And Albert, I have just my own question. In regards to what you just said, there's a little bit of that element of the performativity and the aesthetics too, right? We have when we say we recognize our aunties, like when we see them, how do you see your aunties or yourself as an auntie?
Oh, I don't know. It's just I'm always sharing art, opportunities for education, opportunities to travel. So it is kind of that nosy auntie who kind of knows what's going on, what the opportunities are, and just sharing it with people, and they decide what to do with it, or run with it. And so, that for me, that is, in many cases, I like to share the history of the Two Spirit movement. I like to share the history of Indigenous culture and evolution, as well as decolonization. So again, I'm very busy, I'm very nosy, and I'm in everybody's business.
Thank you, Albert. Sheila or Doris, did one of you want to talk about being an auntie or your aunties?
I can.
Thank you.
So in the Silk kin system, aunties and uncles are moms and dads as well. And cousins are brothers and sisters. And I think that there is a number of indigenous nations that also have a similar way of viewing kin system. So in that, if something happens to the mother or the father, the child still has a mother and father. So children are never left alone without that maternal, paternal guidance in their life. Because as humans, we need that. We need that soft touch, that compassion of the person who wipes the nose and hugs, kisses the bobo better, and or is a leader and has the answers for things that are linear, and that's as humans, that's what we need. So that's so the basics of the aunties for me and my kin system. As a person who was taken from family, and I have a huge family where it's huge in the Okanagan, like all of the ties and the blood ties of people down there, and even down across that US border that's there now. There I have lots, but then we were taken away. We were pulled right out of it. And the people that ended up taking care of us, like it wasn't, I mean, I was in 7 different homes. I think by the second one, I had already figured out that I'm not listening to them, because in every home, everything you do is wrong, right? Because every family has a different way of doing things, what's normal, even how you sit down at the table and eat dinner. And, we would learn the rules of one family. Of course, in my family would have been considered wild. In fact, some of the criticism that my mom received was that we ran wild and she didn't structure us enough. But that's our ways, is to allow children to learn and to grow and to be and to experience and to be their full selves. And so in those homes, by the second home, we're being criticized and getting hacked because we didn't sit at the table properly, or we didn't eat properly, we didn't have the rules, and so we were criticized there was something wrong with us because of that. So it didn't take long to not trust anybody as auntie or uncle or mom or dad or sister, brother. I began only to trust myself. So, you know, as I aged, I learned that I can choose. I can choose what human and what attributes I want to accept as auntie. So there are people that I see as auntie and allow them to mentor or be in my life as an auntie and trust them like an auntie. And so for aunties, for me, they are full of compassion and tenderness. You can't do anything wrong with an auntie. You're never wrong. They're just loving. I as well, one of my specialties in my work as a counselor, working with people's healing, is you know, a lot of families, and this happened mostly actually in the foster home, want us to call different people, and that opens the door to it. People have been warned about it. You tell your kids to call uncle and auntie, because it sets up in the child that they can trust this person. If that child is not allowed to choose who's auntie or who's uncle, and they're told this is your uncle, and that uncle can be a perpetrator. So that was a huge movement as well, where you don't make your kids call somebody auntie or uncle, because it's too familiar and sets up a trust, especially if you don't really know the person. I'm an auntie. I have cousins that are. I have an auntie that's younger than me. I found huge. My grandmother had 15 kids. 4 was from my blood grandfather, and then 11 was from his brother. So I do have an auntie and one uncle, I think, blood, that are younger than me. So their kids are younger than me, and they want to call me auntie. But I always correct them. I'm not your auntie, I'm your cousin. And they want to call me auntie because of my age and the age difference, and that I have children the same age that they are. But this is where I choose, because I don't want to be their auntie. I don't want that responsibility over that human or with that human, because I don't choose that human. Do you know what I mean? So I don't know if the foster care experience made me see things different as I experienced them. So I created my own way and my own understanding. I really do believe that is part of who I am, is I experience for myself and make my decisions. I don't always listen to what the system or anybody says is what. I will figure out what is what. Because it is about choice. It's about who I choose. So I really can't say that I have very many people that I choose to be auntie, because I don't need one. I do need compassionate, tender people, and I love that, show unconditional love. So if auntie embodies anything, that's right there: unconditional love and acceptance, compassion, and their kisses and their touch and their hugs are medicine. All my relation. Oh, I have one other thing to just share about our language and about understandings. And you know, we're told certain things, but I think if we were to really be who we are, we need to just go to what we feel. And I was told by an elder in the Coast Salish territories that about language, she said, you just feel it. So I made a point from then on, because I'm around, worked with so many groups of people and hear different languages. So when another language is being spoken, I close my eyes and I just allow the words and the energy and the vibration of those words to come into my body, and I feel them. And I may not cognitively or intellectually know what the words are, but I can feel the words. So that is, I think, and as Indigenous people, we have extra powers in our sense of feeling. I think if anything is our gift, that's it. And that's because we're part of the land. The land lives within us. And so we can feel our way and to all kinds of understandings if we allow ourselves. All my relations.
Thank you so much, Sheila. Doris, can you talk about the role of Auntie, or how you enact the role, or how you know the role of Auntie from your community understanding? Doris, you're muted.
Aunties were really important in my life and in everybody's lives in our community. You know, um, much like what Sheila said, you know, they were the second parent, or an uncle was a second parent. But mainly aunties were because of that maternal way that some aunties have, eh, you know, that's embodied as well. And so I grew up with lots of aunties, and some were my blood aunties, and one auntie was very prominent in my life. She took care of us because we were orphaned at a very young age, when I was a baby. And I say orphaned, even though we had a father, he wasn't there for us. So we were orphans, and this one auntie figured very prominently in my life for all of my life until she died when she was 93 years old. About 8 years ago, she passed, and I went home for her funeral. And so, and I have lots of sisters in my family as well, and so we used to now we are the aunties and in my family. And so we used to joke around with that, you know, because sometimes you need to have humor, right? Um, we've been going home a lot in the last decade to our home community to bury our young people, who we've been losing them at a really increased pace because of the opioid epidemic, and perhaps even untreated hepatitis C. Um, and so we were going home for these many funerals, and so and we functioned as aunties at you know, within our families, within our extended family. We were the ones that organized and took care of everything, to even writing eulogies and writing what's going to go on the at the funeral home on their website, and writing all that, and so they looked upon us. And so one time we were just kind of laughing, and they referred to us as the antiques, like old furniture, you know. And so we said, oh, okay, so we're the antiques. So what's your anti handle? Maybe we should come up with some handles, anti handles. So we had different names for each other. One was antisocial. I was antibiotic, which is a play on the Anishinaabe when in English, because antibiotic is an antibiotic, right? It's to clear infection or whatever. And so, but when you say it a certain way, if you say antibiotic in a certain way with the, like I'll say it, antibiotic, it actually means auntie's in town. She must be around, you know? So we had a play on who we were. And this one auntie, my youngest sister, my older sister, because I'm the youngest. And she says, well, I am Vigil Auntie. And we all laughed because she was short and she was the shortest one of us all. And everyone laughed just the way she said it. And then I thought about that, and I thought about our roles, how we were always called upon when people had died to hold the family together. And we functioned in that way over many of these deaths and burials. And I was thinking about this, what she said about Vigil Auntie. And it occurred to me that she kind of hit the nail on the head by saying Vigil Auntie. Because we were caught up in that function of we were holding vigil over and over again and taking care of the family. And so there was some truth in our joking around as well. And like Albert said, aunties are nosy, but and they quite often will ask you things that maybe somebody else wouldn't dare ask you, like your parent. They'll ask you, and you're comfortable sometimes with that. And they're also in our community. They also function in a way to teach about leadership to our community leadership. So they have that function as well. Because I remember my older brother, he's 77 now. He was going to run for chief one time. And he went to go visit our auntie Georgina and told her, I'm going to run for chief. And she said she only said one thing to him. She said in Anishinaabe, when if you're going to run as a leader, when people run for those leadership positions, they should have exemplary character. They should be of exemplary character. And so he interpreted that by saying, well, he reflected and said, maybe I shouldn't run. So he didn't run for chief. And all it took was that one comment from that matriarch in our family. I'm also an auntie now. I'm called auntie by a lot of my two-spirit family. And I kind of function in that way as well. Because like Albert said, there's many of us that have migrated out of away from our communities. And so we're in these other extended families. They're not biological families, but it's a human family, a human indigenous family, Anishinaabe family. If I want to go back to the definition of Anishinaabe for me. And so that's what keeps us strong as indigenous people. And the aunties and the uncles have a role there. And I hear you, what you say, Sheila. You really have to know the people in order to be able to accept them as an auntie. Because our people have been impacted by the colonial systems in some ways that are not very good, and so we have to be very mindful about who we recognize as an auntie in a way, you know, and or an uncle. Yeah, so that's who I am. I'm an auntie to many people, and I love being that auntie. Particularly in the Two-Spirit community, when they started calling me auntie, I thought, wow, that's nice. I accepted it and embraced it, and I embraced the community. I love the Two-Spirit community. I think I've always been part of the Two-Spirit community, and even though I was in the closet for many years, and I'm almost 70, I'm almost 67, and it was only a year ago that I actually disclosed that I was bisexual, and the reason and disclosed why I hid that, and and I was welcomed into the family. So I'm anti-D to some. I'm antibiotic to some. I'm an antique to some people, and I love the multiple roles of that brings with it. You know, that what that title brings, that acknowledgement. Yeah, that's it.
I love that auntie is a role that claims you. Sheila, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just you know, it crossed through my mind, like, what about uncles? And I started thinking about my kids, and you know, like, they're 5 generation without father, without a male. 5 generations. And you know, so, like, what about that? I know that in raising, because I raised my kids alone. I have 3 boys, 1 girl, and there was times when I wished for that male energy to, and it wasn't there, so I had to pull it up myself. And even now, like, I have a very, very close relationship with my kids, who are all adults. My youngest is 49. So and I tell people, like, my kids are my primary relationship, and if you want to be in relationship with me, you have to accept that, because they're my first, and that won't change. So I've held both roles, and I still do. Like, I have sons. They're big guys. One's a construction worker. He rides a Harley. You know, a big butch guy, a bona fide mama's boy, but he's a butch guy. And yeah, they didn't have the male influence, or mentor, if you want to call it that. They've had to choose. As adult men, they have to. They've chosen their mentors. So just something that rolls around in my mind, like, you know, 5 generation fatherless. That's a lot. That's a lot. That changes things. Even from my generation, changes the way people see the world, really. Because our parents are guides. If you have a parent, that the same parent that you stick with, right, or that sticks with you, then they're our guides. All my relations.
Thank you, Sheila. So that actually connects really well with our next question. And it involves talking about Two-Spirit understandings and organizing in relation to gender. So Two-Spirit community organizing specifically involves efforts to carry forward or remember traditional, my goodness, traditional Indigenous understandings of gender and sexuality, and can address impacts of colonization and how we enact gendered roles. Like the role of auntie, it connects with specific roles or specific responsibilities. Can you speak to the resurgence of Two-Spirit organizing and what has been the role of Two-Spirit peoples that you've seen or embodied in your community?
Myself, this journey goes back to 1975 with the work of gay American Indians in San Francisco. And then with Laurie McDonald in Vancouver in 1977, started the organization Greater Vancouver Native Cultural Society, which was really code for a gay Indigenous organization, nonprofit in Vancouver. And they're still active today. And in 1988, when the HIV pandemic, was worldwide in Canada and the US, that really began this sort of Two-Spirit organizing coming together. As we said, with Sheila said about the border being an artificial government construction that separated Indigenous communities. And so in 1988, they had the first annual International Two-Spirit Gathering in Minneapolis. And it was in response to the HIV pandemic and how it was affecting Native American Alaska natives, American Indian Alaska natives who were gay men primarily. And I think the government felt obligated to do something, whether it was intentional or not, but as governments, they do have to respond to infectious diseases. So that first gathering in '88 was built around that. What do we do? What are the issues around HIV and AIDS at the time? And that began the international gathering and has continued on every year since then. And I attended the 36th gathering near Halifax this year, and Sheila was there as well. So really it is that resurgence, as we talked about, deconstructing the binary as a colonial construct, a colonial tool of disempowerment of Indigenous peoples. So it's been a long journey for me. 35 years is a long time, 36 years is a long time. But I saw youth there who were under the age of 36, who had grown up without that baggage, right? Without that burden of homophobia or transphobia, whether it was from coming inside their communities or outside their communities. Many of them were in university. Many of them had careers. Many of them were married and had partners. Many of them had children. And that's what this is about. It's about living life fully, right? So, and this is, as Doris said, this is in many ways predictable. When we come out of colonization, 500 years of colonization, we revert back to what we had, which was amazing, was wonderful. So that's what's happening around us, whether it's the Inquiry and Murdered Missing Indigenous Women and Girls or the Two-Spirit Liberation Movement. We're coming back to how we lived, how we saw the world, how we celebrated life. So it's slowly coming back. And Two-Spirit people are part of that narrative. We're part of that education about, duality or multiple sexual orientations or multiple gender identities. And that was the legacy. That is the thread we're meant to pick up and not to be afraid of it. I think a lot of people are afraid of that, inclusion of, transgender males or females or non-binary people. And, right now we have a big pushback in Canada and the US, which is this nostalgia for the good old days, which is the homophobic, transphobic days of the 50s and 60s. And we can't go back. We can't go back in time, right? And, a lot of the parents are concerned about what their children will be exposed to in elementary and junior high and high schools. And it's just like, well, these places are not straight. They never were, right? There was always queer people in schools, right? Children who were transgender at the age of 6 and 7, they knew it already. And I think these families, they're concerned about gender ideology, but they haven't defined it. They're concerned about sexual indoctrination, but they haven't defined or described that either. They're concerned about exposure to explicit content in schools, but they haven't defined or identified that either. So it's a lot of fear-based, propaganda. And for what it tells me is that these parents are afraid of their children, right? They're afraid of their children disclosing into them that they might be transgender, male or female. They might be gay or lesbian or bisexual, or that's what I mean. So they're not really afraid of the schools or the society. They're afraid of their own children. And in many ways, they're forcing them to lie, to live unauthentic lives, which we know is not healthy. So that's what's happening right now in America. And, the Two-Spirit, the Indigenous community, we really have to push back against that because we have the historical evidence. We have it in our language. We have it in our traditions. And so in many ways, we can be leaders to, combat that homophobia and transphobia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Albert. Sheila, did you want to answer?
What was the question? I know what was on my mind, and that was, I think, something from a question from last week, the first conversation. It's something to the effect of, are we concerned with the word two-spirit as creating a binary, male-female? Spirits don't have, spirit is spirit. Spirit is energy. The only, male, female, that's about sex. And sex is about whether you have eggs and can hatch them in your body or the sperm that fertilizes them. It doesn't matter what you're doing in your life, if you're making bread or changing a tire. You can have a baby and change a tire. You can make bread and fertilize eggs in the human female body. It doesn't matter, really. It doesn't matter. And these parents that are afraid of their children, is it because they're so self-centered, they want their children to be a reflection of themselves, and if they can't reflect them, then they're a failure? I have no idea. But children, just like the way that in traditionally Indigenous people, we allowed our children to be who they were, and we watched them. And that's why the elders, the grandparents, they watched them from wee little, and they would know if there was a two-spirit there. In my family, there's many, many two-spirit, lots of queers in my family. Every family unit has 1, 2. I have 2 grandchildren who are queer. I have a great-grandchild who I'm pretty positive is two-spirit. He's just a 5, but he, as his grandma, I can see that in him already, and it will be nurtured, and will be accepted. And he comes into the family pictures and he's wearing his big pink bow, and we're all there, and he's embraced and he's loved. So that's how you be with children. That's how we allow humans to be who they are. Just leave them alone. And gender has really nothing to do, or sex. It's we're human, and we need to just be who we are. And if that changes too, that's okay. If that changes, when we allow people to just grow and to be, there will be lots of transitions and changes. And they will become fully evolved spirits that way. All my relations.
Thank you, Sheila. Doris, did you want to add something?
Sure. Like I said earlier, I've always been part of the Two-Spirit community from about 40 years ago. Because I was involved in the performing arts, and many of the people I worked with in the performing arts, Indigenous performing arts community, were two-spirited people, very creative spirits, brilliant writers, performers, dancers. So I moved in that community for more than 40 years. I was quite young, probably when I was 24, 23 years old, I began moving in that circle. And for all those years, being part of the community, engaging in the community, and feeling comfortable in that community, I used to ask myself, what's my role in this community? You know, and part of it was support, I suppose, way back then, like and admiration for the creativity of the folks I was working with, the Two-Spirit people. And they were groundbreaking people as well, even back then. We broke the ground in terms of the establishment of Indigenous theater in Canada. And together we did that. And so in terms of my own activism, I suppose I could say at one time, I could say that I was a strong ally of the Two-Spirit community all those years. And that changed for me in my own understanding recently, when I decided to disclose my own bisexuality status and come out of the closet at 66 years old. And when I did that, I was thinking, I wonder how many other 66-year-olds there are in our Indigenous communities that are still hiding in the closet. And I also am a grandmother. And I have two trans granddaughters in my family, and Two-Spirit grandson. So, you know, and I had to work with my own family in our own family dynamics. I had to support my family to support their child. I remember my daughter saying to me, "Mom, I think I'm not going to say his name. I think he's gay. And what do I do?" She came to me and I said, "Love him." That's the first thing you can do. It's just to love him. So that was enough for her to hear. So she's like a big protector of her child now, along with me. And but things are not easy sometimes, even within, you know, when young people are coming out like that or deciding they're going to transition from male to female within a family like ours, for example. And sometimes we know the rates of, you know, suicide among young Indigenous trans, for example. Um, you know, we know the high rates of suicide, and that was visited upon us too as a family unit. And then that's when I realized, where do we go as a family? how do we deal with this? Is there a support mechanism out there that can support a family like ours to support our loved one who we support for their choice, and we love and embrace them for who they are and who they want to be? And so there's a lot of activism happening within the Two-Spirit movement, but there's still factions of that are kind of left out in terms of meeting the needs of particular folks within that movement, like trans, for example. And I want to include the families too, because I think families need to be families like ours who love and support our family member. You know, we need to work with the Two-Spirit community to develop resources, for example, for families such as ours, because maybe that will mitigate some of the harms that young Indigenous trans experience. Maybe that's going to mitigate that if we can role model families that do support and love and support and hold up their family member who's transitioning, for example. There needs to be room there. And really, I guess what I'm talking about is we're all a family, right? Like our Indigenous communities where our kinship was our strength. And the government came and tried, and they disrupted that kinship system. And I think we need to kind of reclaim it into the future to begin to see ourselves as one big family. Particularly, I would like to room for my own family to attend a Two-Spirit gathering, for example, with our trans family members, and to show our support to. So I think we still have a ways to go, but I see it moving forward, and I'm speaking at it from that familial kind of stance for myself, and probably for other people too, you know. So I've been around for a long time within the Two-Spirit community, and but I'm now a different kind of activist within that community in terms of what I just spoke about. And I'll continue to speak about that until I begin to see change, or see some elevation of that, or amplifying of that that understanding in that way. But I do see a resurgence. I so admire the leadership of the Two-Spirit community with historians like Albert, and there's a number of people that carry that that knowledge of the community, and I would like to see a historical piece done at some point about the Two-Spirit community, maybe a retrospective exhibition somewhere in a the Museum of Civilization or something, or at the National Arts Gallery in Ottawa. So we need to pull in all our artists as well to help with that. And there's quite a number of them that I know, like Kent Monkman and the Kent Monkmans of the world, and Jeremy Dutcher, because it doesn't have to be just visual, it's also spoken. And it could be very beautiful retrospective. And so that's about it. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Doris. We're almost at the end of our time, but it wouldn't be a conversation on gender if we didn't bring up our uncles a little bit and the role of our uncles. So I wanted to maybe give the last question and answer to Albert, but Doris and Sheila, you may also have some thoughts on this. And I would like to inquire at the intersections of the role of Indigenous men and masculinities and our uncles, because they're also part of this conversation. Albert? Albert, you're muted.
Yeah, a number of years ago, I was involved in an initiative with Dr. Robert Innes and Dr. Kim Anderson from Saskatchewan that really was examining the impact of patriarchy on Indigenous masculinity. And they published a book called, what was the book called now? Indigenous Men and Masculinities. And there were 16 scholars from around the world that contributed to that book. And I attended a forum in Orillia, Ontario, where we brought together people to talk about that. And I talked from the Two-Spirit lens. But again, you know, on October 3rd in Manitoba, we elected the first First Nations Premier of Canada, who's Rob Canoe, right? Who's a father, he's a chicken dancer, he's a singer at the pub, and he's also a politician and a premier now. So again, in terms of the identity of men is evolving and changing, you know, across Canada. But I think that's, again, you know, from the point of view of Dr. Anderson and Dr. Innes was, what was the impact of colonization and patriarchy on what was known as Indigenous masculinity or Indigenous male identities, right? And I know, you know, like sports is huge in the Indigenous community, whether it's baseball or hockey or basketball or skateboarding. And a lot of times it's very dominated by males, right? So it's a culture of masculinity around sports. And a lot of times it is not very inclusive of women or inclusive of Two-Spirit people. So that has to be an ongoing conversation, you know, that was started by Dr. Innes and Dr. Anderson about who are the Indigenous men in our society, our culture, our families, our governance, you know, what is masculinity, right? Because like Sheila said, her son can be Butch. I can be Butch if I have to, and I'm sure William could be too, and Doris, if we have to, right? So those are the nuances that we have to get to in terms of this conversation about gender, because it's still the conversation is still binary, male and female. Two-Spirit people have made some inroads, but again, I think particularly men, Indigenous men in the Americas, because of colonization, are targeted for violence, right? Because we carry that warrior mentality or that view of the warrior, which is really about resistance to colonization, right? So and you see with policing, there's a lot of Indigenous men who are in jails in Canada and in the US, right? So there's that piece. We have to have that conversation about what is the role of men in research? What is the role of men in HIV and STBVIs? Because a lot of times that weight is put on the women to say, well, protect yourself, protect yourself. It's all on the women, right? It's not in a conversation with the men, right? So that's another, I think, probably another conversation we could have.
I really like what Albert just said. I mean, we've had these a number of conversations about this, and you know, about women being the ones that have to do all the work in terms of protecting themselves. And there is a small little trickle, I won't say a resurgence, that's beginning to happen in small pockets across the country where men gather together. And there's small little groups that are being formed. There's one that's been around for a long time called, and I think it was formed about 10 years ago, called Dudes Club. And and they've been around, and they have several chapters. They were primarily in British Columbia, but now they've got other chapters in Ontario, for example. In Southern Ontario, they've got a dudes club there too, um and in one of our recent conversations, we were talking about, like, are any of these conversations happening around the sacred fire at ceremonies, where men gather, or within the lodges, because men get together in there too. And um, so I think there's room to grow that, and find those champions within the community that can initiate those kinds of conversations, because patriarchy totally flipped um, the role of men in our community. There was no patriarchy um, in terms of the Western understanding of patriarchy, and those roles were totally flipped, and we have to decolonize, because I know, with my own son, um, we were not a perfect family. We were all institutionalized at some point in our family history, in our family journey of my own little family. Um, and today my son is almost 50, and he went through the group homes, into provincial systems, and then into the federal systems. So he's had quite a journey, and I've supported him through all that. Like, we struggled as a family, and he's come out on the other end, and he's now um, the lead firekeeper in our community, and he's working for the justice program as a reintegration worker. So there is hope. People can turn around, and somebody like him would probably be able to facilitate a circle around the fire, around the sacred fire, around the fire keeping lodge, with the folks with the men that come through there to take care of the fire. So there's different ways that we can look at this to flip it back. Yeah. And so I think uncles in some contexts could also be uh um used in a particular way that would cause harm. And I think we need to talk about that as well, and same with aunties as well. But more on that patriarchal side, I think, and we need to talk about that as well, you know, because that could be used in the wrong way, call me uncle. And somebody could molest somebody, or we need to talk about those kinds of things. And that might be not a very nice thing to say, but it is the reality, and we need to break that somehow, and yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Doris. We only have a few minutes left. Sheila, did you have any thoughts that you'd like to close us with?
No, just, that, there's so much mixed up communications and informations. Today, something that's lit my fire is the issues of pretendians and the information and teachings that they have out there, which has completely mixed a whole bunch of our ways, and people are eating it up. And so I'm really glad that we're having this conversation,
Thank you so much. I just wanted to thank, on behalf of the Feast Center, all our speakers that joined us today and our audience as well. Albert, I would like to ask, can you close us off our conversation today?
Thank you, Catherine and Doris and Sheila and William, and as well as the attendees today. So it's been a very rich conversation, and again, a lot of knowledge was shared, a lot of perspectives were shared, and as I see it, that was meant to be. You know, what came to mind of the speakers, what we shared with each other, our personal or social or lived experience. With family especially, I think is very important. I think that is kind of what the spirits had shown us today, is the importance of family, the importance of kinship, and of being there for those who need family around them. So I think that's probably the most profound thread that I picked up today. And we thank the spirits who joined us in this conversation, that we received what we needed to receive today. And we also thank everybody who joined us. So have a good day, everybody.
Miigwech.
Thank you. Thanks for everyone for joining us today.